Hello again, welcome back to the Flicks the Church Forgot. My name is Peter Laws, and this is the show where I explore the deeper and the sometimes spiritual themes of horror movies. Now this is the second part in a two-part episode where I'm going to be exploring or recommending some great horror movie books that you could buy for your loved ones at Christmas or even buy for yourself. Now check out the first part for some earlier recommendations, but for now I'd like to kick off with a fascinating cultural history. It's called Satanic Panic, Pop Cultural Paranoia in the 1980s. Look at that cover. Wow. This book, from Fab Press, doesn't just explore horror films, but it looks at a curious decade where even the most innocuous cultural expressions became a source of terror and dread for society. Exploring this is this brilliant book, Satanic Panic, and it's edited by Kier-La, Janisse, and Paul Corupe. Hope I pronounced that right. In the 1980s, leg warmers were everywhere, and so it appears from this book was Satan. For example, you could find him crafting the distorted metal sounds of bands like Venom. Yeah, can you remember Venom? My brother had the infamous album Welcome to Hell by Venom on vinyl, and I nicked it one night from his bedroom and put it on my record player so I could play it backwards, and sure enough, as I was playing it backwards, I heard a voice saying, "You're gonna burn in hell! I'm gonna crush your bones!" and all this sort of crazy stuff. We were told back then that would drive us insane. We also were told that Satan was driving Dungeons and Dragon nerds to suicide. When I tried D&D at school, it was just a kind of sweet, safe, geeky type thing that a bunch of us were doing, like battling orcs and Lovecraftian tentacle things. Whereas for us it was atmospheric laughs. For the louder voices in society, we were actually opening up portals to pure, cruel evil. Even the kids' toy He-Man was a portal for the fallen one, despite his relentlessly nice sermon to the end of each episode. You remember He-Man? And at the end there would always be like a moral of the story, like, Orko didn't want Battlecat at his birthday party, which made Battlecat sad. We have to be careful not to hurt other people's feelings. All this sort of forced morality stuff. Despite all this, he was seen as a vessel for the demonic. All this hysteria is covered brilliantly in this decade by a book that in some ways feels amusing to us today, looking back on it, to the hysterical way people could see the devil in such innocent entertainments. Yet for those who lived through that decade, and I did, I was a teenager, a young kid at the time, this book is as a fun and yet sobering reminder of how unfunny it was at the time. From preschool staff being accused of satanic ritual abuse to teenagers being forced to cut their hair and wash off their makeup because they basically were parading around the satanic or whatever, and that they were clearly on a path to murder, or at least self-murder. The decade was a time of ferocious finger-pointing, where society and the church and others saw the loves of popular culture and assumed they must be diabolical. The book is written as a series of thought-provoking essays, and the subject range it's wonderfully diverse. For example, there's a chapter in here on Christian metal, bands like Striper and stuff like that, which was an unexpected treat. And it was also nice to see an in-depth look at one of my favorite devil movies, which is Evil Speak, which I've mentioned before in this show. The book is lavishly illustrated with a retro pic on pretty much every page. But again, if you're reading this at work or something like that, some of the pictures occasionally are a bit grisly, but not loads of them. But it might not be safe to sit and read in front of your grandparents. That said, though, still, it's a really great book. I once saw on the TV show Mad Men, Don Draper say that the word nostalgia means to ache from an old wound. And reading this book is like a fun, thrilling window into the themes of my youth. But there is a pain there too for many people who'll read this. They will remember being falsely accused or made to feel like monsters. And also there's a pain as well when you read it for the well-meaning parents and church folk who were just worried about their children and then were just caught up in this moral panic. Satanic Panic, I think, is a sobering and chilling read and a well-written read, and it's worth checking out. It's from Fab Press, Satanic Panic. Now, if you enjoy exploring the specifically spiritual side of horror movies, then I'd recommend this book to you, which is The Gospel of the Living Dead by Kim Paffenroth. Oh yeah. Now, this book has been out for a while, actually. It's been about 10 years old, this book. So Paffenroth was wily enough to spot that the zombie was becoming a cultural megalith back in 2006 or 4, whenever this was out. But perhaps hadn't realized that 10 years later that it would still be the defining monster of our current age. Paffenroth concentrates on the zombie worlds of George A. Romero. That's no problem with me. I love those films. But obviously it's a decade old, so it only covers the first 4 Romero movies. That's Night, Dawn, Day, and Land of the Dead, plus the Dawn of the Dead remake from 2004. Now, to be honest, I don't really feel we're missing much, that it doesn't look in depth at Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead. I didn't really rate those films a great deal. But the first 3, Night, Dawn, and Day, particularly for me, are key zombie horror movies, and so it's great to have the biggest ones in here. I'm a particular fan of Day of the Dead, by the way. Check out my review of that at the podcast page through SoundCloud or through iTunes. But it's a pretty fascinating book, and it really pulls out some themes and ideas from the Romero films, particularly theological ones, that might have you like rethinking the film, or at least wanting to watch them again to see the sociological and cultural symbols and things that he finds in there. So it's a really interesting book. It's out from Baylor University Press, and it's called Gospel of the Living Dead, George Romero's Visions of Hell on Earth. Now, if you're looking to broaden your knowledge of zombies rather than just Romero, then you'll get a great general overview of the zombie genre in this book called The Book of the Dead by Jamie Russell. This is an older edition. This is an in-depth look at the cinematic zombie. It goes all the way from William Seabrook, who inspired White Zombie, to the films of modern cinema today. Well, I say today. This book came out in 2006, and so obviously a heck of a lot of the zombie action has happened since then. But it actually might be worth, therefore, you picking up the newer edition from Titan. This is from Fab Press, but there's an edition from Titan from 2014, which is an expanded and updated version. I don't know if it has all the colour pictures in it, but this one does have some colour section. The book is really well researched, and it's put together well, and it pulls out some fascinating historical details about the zombie phenomenon. It's called Book of the Dead by Jamie Russell, and it's got an awesome picture from City of the Living Dead from Lucio Fulci on the front. Can't go wrong with that. Another book that's been out for a while is Teenage Wasteland, the slasher movie Uncut by J.A. Kerswell. This is a lovely little book. I love the look of it and the feel. It charts the rise of the slasher movie from the German Krimi and Italian giallo origins to the explosion of slashers in the late 70s and early 80s, the golden age. What I love about this book is that it's written by a man who clearly adores this particular subgenre of horror, and he covers many of the films you'll love, but there's plenty of others here that you may not have heard of, sort of more obscurios that you might want to seek out. It looks the part too, with stacks of stills and posters and video covers to pore over, while you're reading this kind of romp through slasher history. This would be a very pleasant book to get under the Christmas tree come Christmas morning. This is Teenage Wasteland, the slasher movie Uncut. It's been out for a while, published by New Holland. Now, so far the books we've been looking at have concentrated on horror movies and culture in general. But the next couple of books that I want to talk to you about, they place their attention on single films. The Beast of Boggy Creek by Lyle Blackburn is a riveting account of the so-called Fouke monster. This is the red-eyed Sasquatch that was found apparently wandering the creeks of Arkansas. Now, if you're into cryptozoology, you'll find loads of good stuff to chew on in here. So it's a really great book if you're into Bigfoot stuff, which I'm always up for a bit of Bigfoot. But I've added this to this list of horror movie books because it particularly talks about the film that this monster inspired, and that was The Legend of Boggy Creek by Charles B. Pierce. That film casts a very hefty, hairy shadow across this book, and it's a vital thread in the history of the creature. I would say a great many people actually were drawn to cryptozoology, in particularly Bigfoot, because they first saw Pierce's film, The Legend of Boggy Creek, and a whole bunch of other ones around it. So it's a still spooky docudrama, which I loved and still love. There's other horror flicks that get mentioned that were influenced by the monster, the creature from Black Lake. I enjoyed that film too. and also a forgotten 90s documentary called The Hunt for Bigfoot. Lyle's book, The Beast of Boggy Creek, I think is a really well-researched example of how Fortean culture can slip so easily from life to art and then just go back again. And by the way, if you want my opinion on some key Bigfoot movies, including Boggy Creek and Sasquatch and some of the other guys, Legend of Bigfoot and all that stuff, Snow Beast, oh, I love Snow Beast, then check out my SoundCloud page or through iTunes, which houses the audio archives of the Flicks the Church Forgot podcast. You'll find some Bigfoot action there. Another little gem is Tony Earnshaw's Salem's Lot, Studies in Horror Film. Now, anybody who has watched this show before or heard my podcast will be well aware that I'm a massive fan of the original 70s TV movie Salem's Lot, based on the Stephen King novel. So, like the ravenous vampires of the film, I devoured this book when it first came out. It features both vintage and recent interviews with all the sort of key players. It's tastefully illustrated and detailed. It's an exploration of a really good classic Gothic film. Salem's Lot's getting more love these days with a superb soundtrack that came out on both CD and from Entrada and vinyl from Waxwork, and so it's great to see the film getting a bit more appreciation these days. It also came out on Blu-ray in certain markets, but I'd say Earnshaw's book is the perfect companion to read while you're spinning that Waxwork vinyl or the Entrada album. It's on Spotify as well, actually. It's filled with great stills and unusual shots, like the purple napkins that were used at the special premiere showing in the film. Wish I had one of those. I'd definitely put that on my wall. And there's a section of the screenplay here in the book, which is lovely, and a really nice bit where you can see the movie locations and compare them with their modern day counterparts. So yeah, I'd really recommend this. If you love Salem's Lot, this is the book for you. Finally, and last, by no means least, I want to recommend this horror movie book classic. It is Danse Macabre by Stephen King. If for some reason you're not aware of this book, I mean, I don't know how you wouldn't be, but if you're not, it was originally written by King, and let me just get a date for you. It was 1981, this edition was, and it was basically him exploring in a non-fiction format rather than fiction the horror genre. It's his overview, asking why he is drawn to it and why we are drawn to it in general, and what sort of themes the genre brings about. Now, King's style might not be to everybody's taste, I suppose, but it certainly is to mine. I've always enjoyed Stephen King, and I loved reading this the first time round, and I'm reading it again at the moment, and it's really funny and thought-provoking. It kind of feels like a conversation with a fellow horror nerd, which is ultimately what Stephen King is. It's now out in an updated edition, which is worth checking out. You might not always agree with his choices of truly great films. I don't always agree with films he thinks are really scary, and sometimes he can dismiss films that I think are great. But it's difficult and hard not to respond and warm to a man who is so enamored with spooks and zombies, and especially when he invented so many of them himself. Now, of course, there's a bunch more horror movie books out there, Crystal Lake Memories and all that sort of stuff, but I just wanted to grab some of the ones that I actually own so I could show you them in person, as it were. But, you know, I hope that this last 2 episodes have given you a bit of a list for looking out for some potential books for your horror loved one in your life, or perhaps even for yourself. Well, listen, thanks for listening and watching, and remember, you can follow me on Twitter at Rev Peter Laws, or do go to SoundCloud or Facebook, type in the Flicks the Church Forgot and find me there. And I'd be up for it if you could share, and ideally, could you subscribe to the channel? The more numbers we get, that can be encouraging for advertising and stuff like that. And I'll be also close by saying have a fantastic Christmas, be blessed, and I hope you find the time in the Christmas season to curl up with a creepy movie or a jolly good horror movie book. And one more thing, don't forget the Flicks the Church Forgot. Merry Christmas.